The rain had been falling all afternoon, steady and quiet, like the city itself was sighing. Inside a high-floor office overlooking Midtown Manhattan, the only sounds were the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional distant wail of a siren far below. The woman sitting at the desk hadn't moved in nearly an hour. Her blazer was slung over the back of her chair, sleeves rolled up past her elbows, fingers still resting lightly on the arms of the leather seat, as if she'd just paused mid-thought. Around her, the room was sleek and modern. Glass, steel, muted grays, but it felt strangely empty, like a stage after the actors had gone home. She'd just wrapped up a brutal board meeting. 3 hours of tense negotiations, skeptical questions, and carefully worded pushback about the company's latest product launch. She'd held her ground, of course. She always did. But now, alone, the weight of it all settled over her shoulders like a heavy coat she couldn't take off. She reached for her coffee only to find it cold. With a quiet sigh, she pushed it aside and turned to the cardboard box sitting on the edge of her desk. It had arrived that morning, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine, old-fashioned the way her aunt still sent things. From home, the note had read in looping cursive that hadn't changed in 30 years. Inside were a few childhood keepsakes, a chipped porcelain doll with one eye missing, a faded ribbon from a school spelling bee, a stack of Polaroids showing a much younger version of herself grinning beside a woman with kind eyes and tired hands. And then, tucked beneath it all, something she hadn't seen in decades, a small notebook, bound in thin, cracked leather the color of dried earth. The corners were worn soft, the spine creased from being opened and closed too many times. Water stains bloomed across the cover like ghostly flowers. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew this book. She'd seen it on her mother's nightstand every night of her childhood, always closed, always just out of reach. Once, when she was 7, she'd asked what was inside. Her mother had smiled, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and said, "Someday, mija, when you're ready." She'd never gotten the chance to read it. Her mother had gotten sick fast, so fast it felt like a dream or a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. 1 month she was making tamales in the kitchen, humming along to old rancheras on the radio. The next she was gone. The notebook disappeared after the funeral, packed away with everything else. The woman had assumed it was lost, thrown out by well-meaning relatives clearing the apartment. She hadn't thought about it in years. Not really. Now here it was. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. It felt lighter than she remembered, fragile, like it might crumble in her hands. She ran her thumb over the cover, feeling the grooves of time, the quiet history held within. Outside, thunder rumbled softly, a low echo that matched the unease in her chest. She glanced at the clock, 6:47 p.m. The office was empty. The city lights were beginning to flicker on through the rain-streaked glass. No one would disturb her. No emails, no calls, no expectations. Just her, the rain, and this little book that had waited 25 years to speak to her. She opened it. The first page was filled with neat, careful handwriting, slightly slanted, full of loops and flourishes, the kind of script people didn't really use anymore. At the top, in slightly darker ink, were 3 words that made her eyes sting. For my Elena. She swallowed hard. Her mother had never called her by her full name unless it was serious. Elena meant she was about to say something important. Mia was for comfort. Elena was for truth. She kept reading. When you're ready, that was it. No date, no explanation. Just those 5 words written with such certainty, as if her mother had known even then, that her daughter would grow up to be someone who carried the world on her shoulders, someone who'd need to hear this at exactly the right moment. She turned the page. The next entry was dated March 12, 1994. She was 8 years old. The entry began with a simple observation. Elena asked me today why the sky is blue. Not what color is the sky, no, she wanted to know why. She stood there in the backyard, barefoot in the grass, squinting up like she was trying to solve a puzzle only she could see. I didn't know the real answer, so I told her it was because the angels were painting it just for her. She frowned and said, "Angels don't use paint, Mama, they use light." I didn't know what to say. My heart felt too big for my chest. A small, unexpected laugh escaped her. She remembered that day. She'd been obsessed with science books from the library, carrying them around like treasure. She'd even tried to build a solar oven out of a pizza box and aluminum foil. It hadn't worked. But her mother had eaten the slightly charred marshmallows anyway, declaring them gourmet. She turned another page. April 3rd, 1995. She came home crying today. Some boys at school told her she talks too much, that no one wants to hear her ideas. She's only 9. But she stood in front of the class and explained how we could recycle lunch trays into planters for the school garden. They laughed. She didn't cry until she got home. I held her while she sobbed into my apron. Then I made her sit at the kitchen table and write down every single idea she's ever had. Write them down, I told her, so you never forget that your mind is a gift. And gifts aren't meant to be hidden. She wrote for 2 hours. I saved the list. The woman blinked rapidly, trying to clear the blur from her eyes. She didn't remember writing that list. But she did remember the feeling, the hot shame, the sting of being told she was too much. And she remembered faintly the warmth of her mother's hand smoothing her hair, the smell of laundry soap and cinnamon. She kept reading. Page after page, each entry a window into a life she'd almost forgotten. Her mother wrote about her stubbornness, her curiosity, the way she'd stay up late reading under the covers with a flashlight. She wrote about worries too, about money, about working 2 jobs, about whether she was doing enough. But always, she circled back to her daughter. She's going to change things, Bae, one entry said. Not because she wants to be famous, but because she can't stand to see things broken when they could be fixed. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle. The city lights shimmered like stars caught in puddles. The woman didn't notice. She was lost in the past, in the voice of a woman she'd spent years trying not to miss too much, because missing her hurt too deeply. Then she came to an entry dated just 2 weeks before her mother passed away. The handwriting was shakier, thinner, as if written with great effort. The doctor says I don't have much time. I'm not scared for me. I'm scared for her. She's so young. Who will tell her she's enough when she doubts herself? Who will remind her that kindness is strength, not weakness? I keep this diary so she'll know that I saw her. Really saw her. Not just my little girl, but the woman she's becoming. I hope she reads this when she's standing tall, leading others, doing good. But if she reads it when she's lost, I hope these words find her like a hand in the dark. The woman closed the book gently, pressing it against her chest. Tears spilled over, silent and warm. She hadn't cried like this in years. Not since she'd built walls around her heart to survive boardrooms, layoffs, betrayals, the relentless pressure to be perfect. But here, in this quiet room with her mother's words echoing in her mind, those walls cracked. She thought about the meeting earlier that day. The cold calculations, the focus on margins and market share, the way she'd shut down a junior employee's suggestion about community outreach because it wasn't scalable. She'd been efficient, professional, detached. But had she been kind? Had she been the woman her mother believed she could be? She looked down at the diary again, at the faded ink and fragile pages. This wasn't just a keepsake. It was a compass. A reminder of where she'd come from and who she was meant to be. Outside, the rain finally stopped. A sliver of moonlight broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow across the desk. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, and opened the diary once more. This time, she didn't just read. She listened, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She dozed off once or twice in the leather chair. The diary still clutched in her hands, but every time she drifted, a memory would surface, sharp and sudden, like a fish breaking the surface of a quiet pond, and she'd jerk awake again, heart pounding. By dawn, the sky outside had turned pale gray, and the city below began to stir. Delivery trucks rumbling, early commuters clicking down the sidewalk, the distant hum of life restarting. But in her office, time felt suspended, caught between past and present. She made coffee in the small kitchenette down the hall. Strong, black, just how her mother used to drink it when she came home from her night shift. The smell alone brought back a flood of images. The tiny kitchen in their old apartment, the linoleum floor worn thin near the sink, the way her mother would lean against the counter with her eyes closed for just a moment, before turning on the stove to make breakfast. Back at her desk, she opened the diary again, not to reread what she'd already seen, but to keep going. There was more, so much more. The entries from her early childhood were full of small moments, things she'd forgotten or never even noticed at the time. Like the time she'd tried to fix the leaky faucet with duct tape and rubber bands. Her mother had written, "She stood on a stool for 20 minutes, tongue poking out in concentration. When it still dripped, she didn't cry. She just said, "Okay, next time I'll use glue." I didn't have the heart to tell her it was the washer. Let her believe she can solve anything. Maybe one day she will. Another page described a rainy Saturday when they'd stayed in, eating popcorn and watching old movies on a fuzzy TV. She fell asleep halfway through, head on my lap. I didn't move for hours. Just watched her breathe. Sometimes I wonder if love can be measured. If it can, mine for her would fill oceans. She traced the words with her finger as if touching them might bring her mother closer. It wasn't dramatic or grand, just ordinary days, ordinary love. But that was what made it real. That was what made it hurt. Then she turned to an entry from the summer she was 7. The handwriting was brighter, more energetic, like her mother had been smiling as she wrote. Today my girl did something amazing. Her teacher mentioned that some kids in class don't have books at home, not even one. Elena came home quiet, didn't touch her dinner. Then, after bedtime, I found her at the kitchen table with scissors, construction paper, and a shoebox. She was making book coupons, little tickets she could give to her friends so they could borrow her books any time. But she didn't stop there. She went door to door in the building, asking neighbors if they had old books to donate. By Friday, she'd collected 37. She organized a library in the classroom closet. The teacher cried. I cried. She just shrugged and said someone had to do it. The woman sat very still. She didn't remember this. Not clearly. She remembered liking books, yes, and she remembered feeling bad for a classmate who always borrowed hers. But the shoebox, the coupons, the quiet determination, that had vanished into the fog of childhood. Yet her mother had seen it, had written it down like it mattered. Because to her it did. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. All these years she'd believed her drive came from necessity, from having to prove herself in rooms full of people who didn't look like her, didn't talk like her, didn't understand where she came from. She'd thought her ambition was armor, forged in loss and loneliness. But maybe it wasn't armor at all. Maybe it was inheritance. Her mother hadn't pushed her toward success for success's sake. She'd nurtured a belief that problems should be fixed, that silence wasn't the answer, that one person, even a small one, could make a difference. That wasn't ambition. That was compassion with action. She thought about her company now. Viridian Dynamics, clean energy solutions, water purification tech. It sounded noble on paper, and in the beginning it had been. She'd started it after college with 2 friends, fueled by a dream of creating technology that served people, not just shareholders. But somewhere along the way, between funding rounds, IPOs, and global expansion, the mission had gotten diluted. The purifier they'd just launched, it worked beautifully, but it cost $400. Who in her old neighborhood could afford that? Who in most of the world? She'd told herself it was a premium product, that they'd develop a cheaper version later, but later kept getting pushed back. Profit margins, scalability, investor expectations, they'd become the compass, not the cause. And now, reading her mother's words, she felt a quiet shame settle in her chest. She flipped to another page. This one was dated just a few months before the cancer diagnosis. Her mother had been tired more often then, but she hadn't complained. Not in the diary. Went to parent-teacher conference today. The teacher said Elena asks too many questions. Said she disrupts the flow by challenging assumptions. I smiled and thanked her. But on the walk home, I told my girl, never stop asking why. The world needs people who won't accept, because that's how it's done. You're not disrupting, you're awakening. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. My little truth seeker. A lump rose in her throat. She had stopped asking why. Not completely, but enough. Enough to trade idealism for efficiency. Enough to silence her own doubts because this is just how business works. But her mother had never accepted that. Her mother had cleaned houses for people who barely looked her in the eye, worked double shifts without health insurance, patched clothes with mismatched thread, and still believed in dignity, in fairness, in the power of one person to care deeply. The woman stood up suddenly, needing to move. She walked to the window and looked down at the street. People were rushing to work, heads down, coffee in hand, lost in their own worlds. How many of them carried quiet dreams? How many had mothers who wrote about them in diaries they'd never read? She turned back to the desk and picked up her phone. She almost called her aunt, the one who'd sent the box, but stopped herself. Not yet. This wasn't something to talk about over the phone. It needed space, silence, time. Instead, she opened her laptop and pulled up the product specs for the new water purifier. She scrolled through the engineering reports, the marketing plans, the pricing strategy. Everything was polished, precise, impressive. But as she read, she kept hearing her mother's voice. Technology without heart is just noise. She'd never heard her say those exact words, but she knew. Deep down, that's what she would have said, because her mother had never cared about fancy gadgets unless they helped someone. She'd once spent a whole week saving bus fare so she could buy a second-hand fan for their neighbor, an elderly woman who suffered in the summer heat. No fanfare, no recognition, just kindness quietly given. The woman closed the laptop. She walked to the coat closet, grabbed her raincoat, even though the sun was starting to peek through the clouds, and left the office. She didn't tell her assistant where she was going. She didn't check her calendar. For the first time in years, she was following a different kind of schedule, one written not in meetings, but in memory. She took the subway downtown, then walked, past bodegas with handwritten signs in the windows, past murals peeling at the edges, past kids laughing on stoops. The neighborhood had changed. New coffee shops, renovated buildings, but the bones were still familiar. The corner store where she used to buy penny candy, the laundromat with the flickering neon sign, the park where she'd learned to ride a bike, her mother running beside her, hand on the seat until she let go. She stopped in front of a brick building with green shutters. Their old apartment was on the 3rd floor. The windows were different now, double-paned, modern, but she could still picture the flower pot on the sill, the one her mother had filled with marigolds every spring. She didn't go inside. She just stood there for a long time, breathing in the scent of wet pavement and frying plantains from a nearby window. Then she sat on the low wall across the street and opened the diary again. This time, she read an entry she hadn't noticed before, tucked near the back, on a page that had been folded over. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And you're grown. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you've forgotten why you started. So I'll tell you again. You were born to lift others, not just climb. Don't confuse success with silence. Don't trade your voice for a seat at a table that doesn't care if you're there. And when you doubt yourself, remember the girl who turned a shoebox into a library. She's still in you, always. Tears fell onto the page, but she didn't wipe them away. Let them fall. Let them water the truth. She stayed there until the sun was high and the street filled with noise. School let out. Music drifted from open windows. Someone called a child's name from a balcony. Life, messy and loud and beautiful, went on. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt like she belonged, not because of her title or her bank account, but because she carried a legacy of love and quiet courage in her bones. She stood up, tucked the diary carefully into her bag, and walked toward the subway. But she didn't head back to her office. Not yet. First, she needed to find that old elementary school. She needed to see if the library closet was still there. And if it wasn't, she'd figure out how to build a new one. Somewhere, somehow, because someone had to do it. And maybe, just maybe, it was still her. She didn't go back to the office the next day. Not right away. Instead, she walked. She walked past the old elementary school, now with a new fence and a mural of children holding hands around the globe, and stood outside for nearly an hour, watching kids spill out at recess, laughing, shoving each other playfully, chasing bubbles from a teacher's wand. The library closet was gone, replaced by a bright computer lab with tablets and charging stations. Progress, she supposed, but something about it felt sterile. Efficient, yes, but missing the warmth of a shoebox full of donated books. The pride in a 7-year-old's eyes when she handed a friend a book coupon. That afternoon, she finally returned to her building, but not to her usual floor. She went straight to the product development wing, where engineers and designers huddled over blueprints and 3D models. No one expected her. She rarely came down here anymore. Too many layers of management between her and the actual making of things. But today, she needed to see it with her own eyes. She found the lead engineer, a quiet man with glasses and ink-stained fingers, and asked to see the water purifier prototype, the one they'd just launched. He hesitated, then led her to a clean room where the device sat on a stainless steel table, sleek and silver like something from a sci-fi movie. It was beautiful, undeniably impressive. It could filter 99.999% of contaminants, run on solar power, last 10 years without maintenance. It's a masterpiece, she said softly. He beamed. We're proud of it. She nodded, then asked, how much does it cost to make? His smile faded slightly. At scale? Around $280. And we sell it for? $399.99. She looked at the machine, then at him. Who is this really for? He blinked. Well, environmentally conscious consumers. People who camp, travel, or live off-grid. Also, we're pitching it to resorts and eco-lodges. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she asked, have you ever been to a village where the only water source is a muddy river? Or a neighborhood where the tap water smells like chemicals? He shifted uncomfortably. Not personally, no. She turned away, her chest tight. It wasn't his fault. He was doing his job, building something excellent. But excellence without access was just another kind of exclusion. That evening, she called an emergency meeting. Not with the board, not with investors. With her core leadership team, the people who shaped company culture, who decided what got prioritized. She asked them to come to the office after hours. No agendas. Just come. They arrived curious, some annoyed, all surprised to see her sitting, not at the head of the conference table, but in the middle, with the diary open in front of her. She didn't start with data or strategy. She started with a story. She told them about the leaky faucet fixed with duct tape, about the shoebox library, about her mother's hands, rough from cleaning other people's homes, yet always gentle when tucking her in at night. She read aloud the line, technology without heart is just noise. Then she looked around the room, at the faces she'd worked with for years, people she respected, people who'd helped build this company from nothing. I've been leading us wrong, she said, her voice steady but quiet. We built something powerful, but we forgot who it's for. We made a purifier that works miracles, but priced it like a luxury item. Meanwhile, millions of people, kids, families, whole communities, drink water that makes them sick. And we have the knowledge, the skill, the resources to help. But we haven't, she paused. Because it's not scalable enough? Because the margins are too thin? Or because we got comfortable being admired instead of being useful? No one spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, it was heavy, thoughtful. Then she laid out her idea, redesign the purifier. Strip it down to the essentials. Use simpler materials. Partner with local manufacturers in the regions we serve. Accept lower profit, maybe even break even on this version. Call it the community model. Launch it first in neighborhoods like the one she grew up in, not as charity. As justice, one executive cleared his throat. It'll cost us at least $2 million in R&D alone. And the board? The board answers to me, she said gently. And I answer to something older than quarterly reports. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just spoke with a calm certainty that left no room for debate. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a course correction. To her surprise, the team didn't resist. One by one, they leaned in. The head of supply chain started brainstorming local partners in Central America. The marketing lead suggested involving community leaders in the design process. The CFO, usually the most cautious, said, if we position it as part of our core mission, not a side project, it could actually strengthen our brand long term. By midnight, they had a rough plan. Not perfect, but real. The next morning, she canceled the big product launch event scheduled for the following week. Instead, she sent a company-wide email. Not polished corporate speak, but raw and honest. She shared a little of her mother's story. She admitted they'd lost their way. And she announced the community model, inviting every employee to contribute ideas, volunteer, or simply ask questions. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of messages poured in, from interns, from warehouse staff, from engineers in Bangalore. One woman wrote, my village in Kenya still boils water over fire. If this helps even one family there, I'll work weekends for free. That same day, she visited the factory where the purifiers were assembled. She didn't give a speech. She put on a hairnet and safety goggles and spent the afternoon on the line, talking to workers, asking how they'd simplify the design without losing function. One woman, who'd been assembling units for 5 years, showed her a part that could be molded in one piece instead of 3. Saves time, saves plastic, she said. We've been saying that for months, but no one upstairs listens. I'm listening now, the woman replied, and meant it. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. Meetings started with, how does this serve people? Not how does this boost revenue? The legal team worked on open sourcing parts of the design so local groups could replicate it. The R&D lab became a hive of collaboration. Engineers sketching on napkins, community advocates joining Zoom calls, interns testing prototypes in simulated slum conditions. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. A supplier backed out. A test unit failed in high humidity. Some investors grumbled. But something had shifted inside the company. A quiet energy. A sense of purpose that couldn't be faked. One evening, as she reviewed the latest prototype, a smaller, sturdier version made with recycled plastic and a hand crank backup, she opened the diary again. She'd been reading a page each night like a bedtime story from the past. Tonight's entry was short. Today, Elena gave her lunch to a boy who forgot his. When I asked why, she said he looked hungry. No grand speech. No expectation of thanks. Just saw a need and filled it. That's the kind of person she is. That's the kind of world I hope she helps build. She closed the book and looked out the window. The city glittered below, full of problems and possibilities. For so long, she'd thought success meant rising above, getting out, moving up, leaving the past behind. But her mother had never wanted her to leave. She'd wanted her to return, with better tools, wider reach, but the same heart. The next morning, she stood in front of the entire company at the all-hands meeting. No PowerPoint, no graphs, just her, a microphone, and the truth. We started Viridian because we believed technology should heal, not just sell, she said. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that. But I've been reminded, by a diary, by memories, by all of you, that our work matters most when it reaches the people who need it most. She held up the new prototype. This isn't just a machine. It's a promise. A promise that clean water isn't a privilege, it's a right. And we're going to help make sure it's within reach. Applause rose, not the polite kind, but the kind that starts in the chest and spills out, full of hope. After the meeting, she walked back to her office. On her desk was a small package from her aunt. Inside was a faded sheet of paper, the list her mother had made her write at age 9, the one titled My Ideas. At the top, in wobbly child's handwriting, thus I make clean water for everyone. She hadn't remembered writing that, but her mother had saved it. She pinned it to her wall, right next to the company's new mission statement. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not at the top, but in the middle of something that mattered. The first community model purifier was installed in a small courtyard in East Los Angeles, right behind the community center that used to be her elementary school. It wasn't a grand event. No red carpet, no press vans, no speeches from city officials. Just a folding table with bottled water, ironically, a few volunteers in matching t-shirts, and a group of neighbors curious about the strange silver box with the hand crank. She arrived early that morning before anyone else. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She wanted to be seen not as a CEO, but as someone who belonged. As she helped set up chairs, an older woman sweeping the sidewalk paused and squinted at her. "You look familiar," the woman said. "I used to live around here," she replied softly. The woman nodded slowly. "You got your mama's eyes." She didn't say anything for a moment, just swallowed the sudden tightness in her throat. "Yeah," she finally whispered. "I did." By 10 o'clock, families began to gather. Mothers with toddlers on their hips, teenagers on bikes, elders sitting on benches in the sun. She stood near the purifier, ready to explain how it worked, but mostly ready to listen. That was the new rule. Listen first, fix second. A young boy tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed at the machine. "Does it make magic water?" She knelt down so she was eye level with him. "Not magic. Just clean. Safe to drink even if the tap water isn't." His mother, tired-eyed but warm, stepped forward. "Our water's been tasting funny for months. Like metal. The city says it's fine, but..." She trailed off, shrugging. "It's not fine," the woman said gently. "And you shouldn't have to wonder." She demonstrated the purifier, filled the top tank with water from a jug someone brought from their kitchen, turned the hand crank a few times, and let clear, clean water flow into a cup. She handed it to the boy. He sipped, then grinned. "Tastes like rain." Laughter rippled through the group. Someone clapped. And just like that, the machine wasn't just hardware. It was hope, made real. Later, she walked through the neighborhood, visiting homes that had signed up for the pilot program. She didn't bring a team, just her, a small toolkit, and a notebook. In one apartment, she helped an elderly man install a unit under his sink. His hands shook, but he insisted on holding the wrench. "Used to fix everything myself," he said. "Now my eyes don't work so good." She guided his hands, showing him how to tighten the connections. When it was done, he poured 2 glasses of water and handed her one. "To good neighbors," he said. She stayed for nearly an hour, listening to stories about the block, the good, the hard, the everyday acts of care that never made the news. In the afternoon, she visited the old school again, this time to lead a workshop for 5th graders. The teacher had warned her they might be shy, but the kids were full of questions. "Can it clean ocean water? What if it breaks? Do you get paid a lot?" She answered honestly. "No, it can't do salt water yet. If it breaks, we'll fix it or teach you how to. And yes, I make good money. But the best part of my job isn't the money. It's getting to help people like you." After the lesson, as the kids filed out for recess, one girl hung back. She couldn't have been more than 8. With braids and scuffed sneakers, she clutched a folded piece of construction paper in her hands, her eyes wide but determined. "Can you read this for me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "It's important." The words hit like a punch to the chest. She knew that phrase. She'd heard it in her own voice decades ago, when she'd handed her mother a poem she'd written for Mother's Day. She knelt again, just like with the boy. Of course, the girl handed her the paper. It was a card, drawn in bright crayon. Flowers, a sun, a big heart. Inside, in careful printing, it said, "Thank you for the clean water. My little brother was always sick before. Now he's better. You're a hero." She looked up, blinking fast. "This is the most important thing I've read all year," she said truthfully. The girl beamed, then ran off to join her friends. She stood there for a long time, the card pressed against her chest. It wasn't about being called a hero. It was about being seen, not for her title, but for her choice to care. That evening, after the last volunteer had packed up and the courtyard was quiet again, she didn't go back to her hotel. Instead, she walked to the cemetery on the edge of the neighborhood, the one where her mother was buried beneath a simple headstone with her name and dates, and the words, "She loved well." She hadn't visited in over 10 years, not out of neglect, but because grief had felt too heavy to carry into that quiet place. But today she needed to come. She needed to show her mother what had grown from the seeds she'd planted. She brought 2 things: a single white carnation, the flower her mother always tucked behind her ear on Sundays, and a copy of the community model manual, printed on recycled paper, with simple diagrams and instructions in both English and Spanish. She knelt by the grave, brushed away a few fallen leaves, and placed the carnation gently on the stone. Then she set the manual beside it. "I finally get it, Mama," she said, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. "You never wanted me to escape this place. You wanted me to bring good things back to it." She told her about the boy who said the water tasted like rain, about the old man who shared a glass with her, about the little girl's card. "I'm not just building machines," she said. "I'm trying to build the kind of world you believed in, where no one has to choose between clean water and rent, where a kid's idea matters as much as a CEO's." A breeze moved through the trees, rustling the leaves like a sigh. She didn't believe in signs, not really. But in that moment, it felt like an answer. She stayed until the sky turned gold, then purple, then deep blue. She didn't cry, not the way she had in her office weeks ago. This was quieter, peaceful, like a promise kept. On the walk back, she passed the community center again. The purifier stood in the courtyard, lit by a small solar-powered lamp they'd installed beside it. A woman was filling a jug, her toddler balanced on her hip. She nodded when she saw her. "Works like a dream," she said. "Glad to hear it," she replied. She almost kept walking. But then she turned back. "Can I help you carry that?" The woman smiled. "Sure." They walked together in comfortable silence for a few blocks, the weight of the jug shared between them. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Back at her hotel room, she opened the diary one last time before bed. She'd read almost all of it now. Only a few pages remained. Tonight she turned to an entry from the winter before her mother got sick. Elena asked me today if I was proud of her. I didn't just say yes. I told her proud isn't strong enough. I'm in awe of you. Every day. She rolled her eyes, she's at that age, but I saw her smile in the mirror. Hold on to that, my love. You are worthy. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. Never forget. She closed the book and placed it on the nightstand. Outside, the city hummed its endless song. But inside, for the first time in a long time, she felt still. Not because everything was fixed, far from it, but because she was finally moving in the right direction. The next morning, before her flight back to headquarters, she stopped by the community center one more time. She left a box of extra filters and a note for the coordinator. For the next family who needs it. As the taxi pulled away, she looked out the window at the streets she once called home. They weren't perfect, but they were alive. And now in a small way she was part of that life again. Not as someone who left, but as someone who returned. And that, she realized, was the real success. Not the corner office, not the headlines, but this, showing up with clean water and an open heart and saying, I see you, and I'm here. 2 years later, the woman stood backstage at a global leadership conference in Geneva, adjusting the lapel of her jacket. The room beyond the curtain was packed. CEOs, policymakers, activists, journalists, all waiting to hear how a once struggling tech company had become a model for ethical innovation. She wasn't nervous. Not really. But she felt the weight of what she was about to do. This wasn't just another speech. It was a passing of the torch. She'd been asked to explain the secret behind Viridian's transformation, the Maria Initiative, as the press now called it. Investors had been skeptical at first. Profits dipped the first year. Some board members resigned. But then something unexpected happened. Customers stayed loyal. Employees became passionate advocates. Communities invited them in as partners, not saviors. And slowly, steadily, the business not only recovered, it thrived in a deeper, more meaningful way. Now she was here to tell the truth, not the polished version, the real one. She walked on stage to warm applause. The lights were bright, the audience expectant. She didn't go to the podium right away. Instead, she walked to the center of the stage, took a breath and held up a small, worn leather book. This, she said, her voice calm and clear, is where it all began. She opened it gently as if handling something sacred. This is my mother's diary. She wrote in it every night mostly about me, about the little girl I was and the woman she hoped I'd become. I didn't read it until I was 42, sitting alone in my office after a meeting where I realized I'd lost my way. She paused, letting the silence settle. I'd built a company that made amazing technology, but it wasn't reaching the people who needed it most. I'd confused success with scale, impact with income. And then I read her words, technology without heart is just noise. She looked out at the crowd, not as a CEO, but as a daughter. My mother never went to college. She cleaned houses, cooked meals for strangers, worked until her hands cracked. But she taught me that true leadership isn't about being in charge, it's about being of service. That your voice matters most when you use it for others. She turned a page, then read aloud, her voice softening. My greatest work isn't what I've done. It's the woman my daughter will become. The room was utterly still. No coughing, no shuffling. Just hundreds of people listening, really listening. When I read that, she continued, I knew I had a choice. Keep climbing the ladder I'd built, or tear it down and build a bridge instead. She told them about the community model, how it now served over 200,000 people across 12 countries, how local teams designed, built, and maintained the purifiers themselves, how kids in schools were learning to test water quality and advocate for their neighborhoods, how the company had restructured its entire business model so that every premium product sold helped fund a community unit. But none of that would have happened, she said, if I hadn't gone back to where I started. If I hadn't listened to a little girl in East LA who handed me a handmade card and said, "Can you read this for me?" It's important, she smiled faintly. That moment reminded me of myself at her age, full of ideas, full of hope, just needing someone to believe I mattered. After the speech, people lined up to speak with her, not for business cards or photo ops, but to share their own stories. A young engineer from Nairobi said she was starting a similar project in her village. A retired teacher from Ohio said she'd been writing letters to her grandchildren about kindness and purpose. A CEO from a major retail chain asked quietly, "How do I begin to change my company's heart?" She answered each one with patience, with honesty, with the same care her mother had shown her. Later that evening, back in her hotel room, she received a package from home. It wasn't from her aunt this time. It was from the community center in East LA. Inside was a new handmade card, this one with glitter and stickers, and a note from the coordinator. "She asked us to send this to you. Said you'd understand." She opened the card. In the same careful printing as before, the little girl had written, "I want to be an engineer like you. Can you send me a book?" Beneath it, the coordinator had added, "She's already building a rainwater filter out of plastic bottles and charcoal. Reminds us of someone we used to know." The woman sat on the edge of the bed, tears in her eyes. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when something full and beautiful overflows. She didn't just send a book. She sent a whole starter kit, basic engineering guides, a notebook, a set of colored pencils for sketching ideas, and a small working model of the community purifier, scaled down for a child's hands. And tucked inside the box, she placed a carefully preserved copy of her mother's diary, now digitized and rebound in durable cloth with a note on the first page. "For the next truth seeker. Your voice matters too." A month later, she returned to East LA for the opening of a new youth innovation lab, funded by Veridian, run by locals, designed by kids. The space was bright and buzzing. Workbenches, 3D printers, shelves of tools, walls covered in drawings and prototypes. In the corner, a group of children were testing a new design for a solar-powered hand-washing station. And there, standing on a stool to reach the whiteboard, was the little girl, now a little taller, a little bolder, explaining her latest idea to a small crowd of peers. When she saw the woman, she hopped down and ran over, not with shyness but with excitement. "You came back." "I told you I would," she said, kneeling to meet her eyes. "What are you building now?" The girl grinned. "Something that helps people. Like you." They spent the afternoon together, tinkering, talking, dreaming. The woman didn't give orders or advice. She asked questions. "Why did you choose that material? What problem are you solving? Who will this help?" The same questions her mother had asked her, all those years ago. As the sun began to set, they sat on the steps outside the lab, sharing a bag of chips from the corner store. The girl looked at her seriously. "Do you think I can really change things?" "I know you can," the woman said, "because you already are." That night before flying home, she visited her mother's grave one more time. She didn't bring flowers this time. She brought a photo of the girl, standing proudly beside her latest invention, surrounded by friends. She tucked it under the edge of the headstone. "I'm not doing this alone anymore," she whispered. "There's a whole new generation coming up, full of heart and grit. And I'm going to make sure they have what they need to shine." Back at headquarters, the Maria Initiative had grown into something bigger than she'd ever imagined. It wasn't just a program, it was a culture. New hires were asked not just about their skills, but about their values. Performance reviews included questions like, "How did you serve others this quarter?" The company's annual report now opened with stories from the field, not financial charts. And every year, on the anniversary of her mother's passing, the woman gathered the leadership team not in a boardroom, but in the community lab in East LA. They spent the day listening, really listening to the people they served. No presentations, no agendas, just presence. One evening, as she sat at her desk reviewing plans for a new clean water project in Guatemala, she opened the original diary one last time. She'd read it cover to cover so many times the pages were soft at the edges, but tonight she turned to the very back and noticed something she'd never seen before. Tucked into the spine, almost hidden, was a tiny envelope. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded neatly. In her mother's handwriting, it said, "If you're reading this, you've done it. You've become the woman I always knew you were. Don't stop. Keep going. And when you meet another little girl with big dreams, pass this on." She pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes. The circle was complete, not closed but open, flowing outward like ripples in clean water. Years later, long after she'd stepped down as CEO, people would ask what legacy she was most proud of. The awards? The patents? The company's global reach? She always gave the same answer. the girl who believed her voice mattered. And the millions like her just waiting for someone to say yes, it does. And in quiet moments when the world felt heavy, she'd think of her mother's words, not as a memory but as a living guide. Because love, when passed forward with purpose, never really ends. It just finds new hands to hold it, new hearts to carry it, new lives to shape. And that more than any title or triumph was the truest kind of success.